Well, good afternoon, or if my watch is right, good morning. I say that because I just flew in today from the U.S. and I came right on over here. These couches were very tempting as I looked at them, but I knew if I sat on one of them, I would be asleep by now. Which does remind me, by the way, I went over to Moscow and gave a presentation earlier this year. And I flew over, and like my trip over here today, I didn't sleep on the flight. And then that next day, the day I arrived, I went to bed and couldn't fall asleep because of jet lag till 5 in the morning, but was awakened by my 6 a.m. wake-up call. And then I ended up giving a presentation that day. And you know, sometimes when you teach, you always have some student that falls asleep. I had the experience of falling asleep in my own lecture, which was I called on somebody, and while they were translating, you know, it was sort of going on, and I was just, you know, but it was a little bit embarrassing because everyone was looking over at me. Anyhow, I feel pretty good right now, so I'm looking forward to this and spending some time with you. I got to tell you, by the way, that I'm very excited to be involved with iJento. In this business that I had done, Shopzilla and BizRate, we were very, very analytic oriented, and it's part of what it is that grew the business to what it is. And I got intrigued and invited to join the board. Really wonderful people that are on the board. I came over and met the people at the company, started looking at the products. Very impressed by the products, went out and interviewed several of the clients and convinced me that I should be part of this particular board. And so I've been flying over quite regularly, interacting with the company, and have been delighted. And really nice to see this particular event that's been put together. They asked me if I would speak today, and I said, great. And then they said, could you speak in a very limited period of time? And I'm used to speaking in an hour and 20-minute blocks, so my apology. This will be a challenge for me. I may end up speaking a little bit faster than I normally do, just to try and fit it all in. But it is a real opportunity to come and just talk to you about some of the things. And in particular, they asked me to talk about sort of marketing metrics and the CMO's perspective. So I spend a lot of time working with various different CMOs, and actually, one of the first things I did when I started working with iJento was I said, we ought to think about who the customer is and how they're really trying to get value out of what it is that we're doing. And so we ought to spend some time talking to the CMOs. And they said, well, okay, go do that. And I meant they should go do that, but I am going to spend some time talking about sort of the CMO's perspective, which means, you know, you really got down into the details. And I loved the presentations that we had from LV and from Reader's Digest. I thought they were really great. I'm going to ratchet it up to the 30,000 foot level and sort of talk about, you know, more broadly what some of the concerns are from a CMO's perspective and get a sense of that. I have been spending a lot of my time specifically on the topic of marketing metrics, and I'll explain why I've been doing that. But let me start by telling you, I spent some time on Friday at an event that we held at Wharton that's called The Future of Advertising. This is a project that we are doing together with Google, and we have invited different ad agencies from around the world and different major advertisers, and have been talking about how things are really changing in terms of how we spend our money and how we do any of communication, which therefore means things are changing in terms of how we have to go about trying to evaluate that. One of the people that was at this event was a really good friend of mine by the name of Rob Malcolm. I don't know if any of you know Rob Malcolm, but you should. Rob Malcolm was the president of Marketing, Sales, and Innovation, also known as the Chief Marketing Officer of Diageo. And actually, he did that for several years. I think it was about 9 years. Before that, he was working for 17 years with P&G, and he ran P&G Europe. He recently stepped down from that position. He called me up and he said, Dave, I'm getting ready to step down from my position at Diageo. And I said, and he said, I haven't told him yet, but I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. And I said, you're going to come teach at Wharton. And sure enough, he now teaches advertising at Wharton. And he's very concerned about the future of advertising. Well, he gave a presentation, he and I both gave a presentation at this event on the future of advertising. And so I was taking rigorous notes, and what I was able to capture were sort of 5 things as he was trying to talk about a CMO's perspective. And he basically said, you know, from a CMO's perspective, this thing has gotten really complex. And the complexity is exceedingly overwhelming. And so one of the #1 things that a CMO is sort of struggling with is how do I simplify the complexity? Because we've got all those, you know, all those eye charts of all these things coming in every which way, and it's like, oh my gosh, there's just so much going on. And how do I go about trying to simplify that? Job #1 is trying to be able to get your hands around it. And then how do you, his words were, how do you decode the subject? How does it really work? So take this very complex thing, simplify it, and then try and make it something that's understandable in some particular fashion. And then what's my model for my business? It really is trying to figure out where is it you really make money, and what's that underlying model for that? And then there's this notion of how do you balance delivery, doing things right, getting value from what it is that you're doing, with learning and growing. And I'm a huge believer in test and learn, test and learn. And a lot of what the new media provides us to do is this opportunity to test and learn. And then how do we balance just implementing and getting it right, extracting as much as we can, versus the opportunity we have for all the experimentation that's out there. And then the next concern is how do I find and train and retain the right talent. And maybe I should just stop right here, having stolen his slide, and say, okay, that's the CMO's perspective. But there's few platforms that I walk away from, so I'll continue talking for a little bit. So I thought it was also interesting that IBM just got done doing and releasing a major study that they did of more than 17,000 CMOs. How many of you have seen some reports from that? So there's a handful of you that have. This was a study that was done not predominantly in North America. It really was a very global study that was done. Goes into great detail. I've tried to simplify it by 3 bullet points, which is, how do I show financial outcomes of marketing spending? I know I'm spending, but how do I show some of those financial results? And people really struggling with that. How do I deal with the complexity of data? And a real sense of I'm not prepared. So the CMOs feel a little bit overwhelmed and not being prepared. And it's reflected in their longevity. The average life of the CMO in that job is 23 months. And that's what it was 3 years ago, and that's what it continues to be. And that's a relatively short lifespan, and it's because they haven't got this stuff right. And they really have a need to get this stuff right. So I put together a program that I run. I run this at our MBA level. I run it at our executive level on marketing metrics. And it is a program that runs for 1 week. I'm going to try and summarize that 1 week in the next 20 minutes as best I can. But let me tell you why I put together that program. And one of the reasons is I took a leave of absence from the school. I became the executive director of the Marketing Science Institute. I won't give you the whole history of it, but suffice it to say, it consists of 72 companies that have been sort of pulled together from a cross-section of different industries and from around the world. And every year, what we say to them is, tell us what it is that keeps you up at night. What are you struggling with the most? And if you would go to MSI's website, what it is that you would find is about 10 years ago, the number one thing that people struggled with was trying to understand basically the accountability or the linking marketing to financial outcomes. And that's what it is they've been struggling with. And every year that's put together, and every year it's been the number one concern that CMOs have. So I get a budget, I spend it, what am I getting back? And it's a real challenge to try and figure out what those things are. When I stepped down as the executive director of that, and I did that for 2 years, by the way, it was really a cool job. I stepped down from that position. And the first thing that I did is I ran a CMO summit. And it was the first one of its kind. And I got MSI to support me on that. And I went to this company called McKinsey. And I said to McKinsey, I said, you know, you guys are a great consulting company. Really, you know, world-renowned, do great things, hire, you know, big bulks of my students and everything. I said, but you're not known as a marketing company. And I said, I want to help you. They got a little skeptical, rightfully so. I said, I want to help you because I want to let you co-sponsor with me this CMO Summit. And what that means is I want you to recruit, and what I want you to do is pay for it. And they said, okay. So I got them to do both of those things. We hand-selected which companies it is that we wanted to have appear. And so we went through, said these are the companies that we want to have the senior-most marketing person. We invited 62 CMOs, 54 of them came. And it's pretty amazing to think you could get 54 people that would have the same 2 days available on their calendar, but they all came to this particular event. I asked everybody at that event, I said, tell me, what is it that keeps you up at night? What's your number one challenge? Tell me, secondly, what it is you're most excited about that you're doing. There were all sorts of things they were excited about they were doing. It was very interesting to hear what they had to say, but there was this huge coalescence around what it is that they were struggling with. And what was it? It was all around marketing metrics. And what is it we mean by marketing metrics? It is, yeah, what is it we should be measuring? But how do we link our marketing spending to our financial consequences? And how do we come up with some measures that could be used universally around the world? So when I see Daniel put his map up and show the things across the various different venues, is I want to have the same metrics I could be using in various different locations as well. Now, some of what happened at this time was there was a big budget squeeze that was going on, and in particular, there was an economic downturn. We saw it again in the most recent 2 years. Now, what's happened is marketing budgets as a percent of total budget is down. And I'm going to put a stake in the ground and take a position right now. Marketing budgets are down not because marketing doesn't provide value, it's because we can't demonstrate that value very well. And that's a real problem. And because we can't demonstrate it, all of a sudden, that budget's going to be pared down. So what happened when the economic downturn happens? What is the result? CEO comes out and says, I want to know the ROI of every dollar I'm investing right now. I'm going to take the money away from those things that are lowest on that list. Everybody comes back, says, here's what we're spending on this new plant, here's what it is that we're spending on this R&D project, here's what it is that we're spending on this new recruiting effort, here's what we're spending, you know, in these various different things, and here's the ROI that we're getting. And marketing says, here's what we're spending, but I can't tell you what the ROI is. Net effect, budget squeezed. Not because it doesn't have a good ROI, not because it doesn't provide great value, but because we're pathetic in trying to be able to show that. And that creates a real problem for us. So here's what I believe. I believe marketing spending leads to a whole set of interim metrics, which leads to some financial types of results, which has an impact on our stock price. Showing the connection between our marketing spending and that stock price is a real challenge because of all the other things that come in. Yet I'm a big believer that as we spend, it does flow through. Sometimes negatively, though. so I don't want to say just keep spending. Then you'd really know I'm a marketing evangelist, where I try to keep that a little bit hidden. But yeah, it's there. And we need to be able to try and draw that connection. One of the other books that I've written is exactly on showing marketing as its impact directly on the market cap of the firm. Well, if you ratchet it up to the CMO's level, that's what they care about. And that's what's important to them. But we talk to a marketer. What's the marketer talk about? Oh, look at the awareness I've got for my brand. Give me $10 million more. Look what I can do to the awareness. And I think the question's got to be, okay, but it's hard for me to put the awareness in the bank. You know, I want to know, you know, so if my awareness goes up by 5 points, what's that do for me? Loyalty, really common measure, very, very common measure. Customer satisfaction, actually customer satisfaction is the most common measure collected across industries today. And real quickly, I'll tell you, I was invited to give a presentation with Mark Hurd in his previous job. Anybody know who Mark Hurd is? George, you know who Mark Hurd is. HP CEO. He was the HP CEO. He invited me to come speak to this intimate users group, sort of like this, at HP. I show up, there's 3,300 people there. And this was when he was relatively new on the job. And he said to me, he gave this presentation, great presentation. He said, my customers are number one. First thing I did when I moved into this job was I looked at our customer satisfaction levels. They were 86%. That's not good enough. I have left as a challenge for the company. We are going to get that up by 5%. He talked about that for a while. The audience loved it. Clearly, he was there to try and satisfy them. That's what was important. I got up afterwards and gave some dribble. Wasn't too important what I talked about. But I talked to him afterwards. I said, wow, I loved your presentation. Tell me, how much is it going to cost you to get customer satisfaction from 86% to 91%? What do you think his answer was? You don't know?
He didn't know.
He didn't know. Yeah, because he said, I don't know. So imagine the CEO of a major corporation saying, I want to go from here to here. I've left that as a goal for the company. I have no idea what it's going to cost me. So then I asked him the next question. I said, okay, if you could go from 86% to 91%, what's that do for you? And his answer was?
The same.
The same. Right. So here we have, now he could get away with that because A, he's the CEO, and B, he came from marketing. But what we're being asked is, don't just deliver this to me. I want to know how this translates to my bottom line. Share requirements, major measure. I'm not going to go through it. You're going to get the book. Look in the book. You'll see it defined in there. Click-through rates, page views, bounce rate, repeat, purchase. We could go through the list. There is a huge list of different metrics. We saw the dashboards up here earlier. And there's this long list of different measures that we could have. And the question is, okay, how much is it going to cost for me to move it up? And what's that deliver for me? And I think that becomes the real challenge. Because what's finance say? They don't say, show me page views. They say, show me the money. And that's what's important to them. And that's what it is that's really, really critical for us. So actually, one of the studies that I funded when I was at the Marketing Science Institute was a study by Tim Ambler. Tim Ambler at the London Business School went out. He measured all the different things that companies were regularly looking at. I don't expect you to be able to read any of those. What I do want you to look at is the red line. On the horizontal axis, percent of firms using this measure. On the vertical axis, percent of firms that look at these measures at the board. The red line is relatively flat. That is, those measures more frequently collected are no more likely to be looked at the board. Or more disturbing, percent of of marketers that look at these measures, percent in finance that look at these particular measures. What do we have? There's only one measure that's up there really high. That one measure, by the way, is the number of new products. Why does finance look at the number of new products?
Expensive, cost of launch.
It's expensive. And?
Future revenues.
So, by the way, one of the reasons that I'm here right now is because classes ended on Friday, and this is exam period. But I'm still in the mode of cold calling on people, so be careful. Be careful here, okay? So, what's the other reason you look at number of new products?
Future revenue stream.
Future revenue stream as well. Okay, you saved a lot of people there, Dave. Okay. So I'm interested in future revenue stream, and that's what it is that's really important for us. I saw this article in the Wall Street Journal. It's now been a few years ago that I saw it. 9 years ago. I clipped it out, I scanned it. I thought it was really interesting. If you go back and look at firms 56 years ago, the average value of a firm, close to 80% of it was determined by tangible assets. That had gone down, and then starting in the 1980s, it started going down precipitously. If we roll the tape forward to 2011, it continues to drop. What it is that the majority of value for firms today is represented by intangible assets. Very different than in the past. Part of what's going on is the nature of the firms have changed. So if you go to shipping and steel industry, it's still tangible assets. But the firms that now dominate industry are much more driven by intangible assets. So this is a pop quiz. I am coming back into the audience. What are the major intangibles that represent the majority of the value of a firm?
Patents.
What is it?
Patents.
Patents. Patents. So, excuse me, patents. Intellectual property would be one of them. Okay.
Brand. You said it as well.
What was that?
Brand.
Pride?
Brand.
Oh, brand. Excuse me. Whew. Brand. Brand. So brand and intellectual property are two of the top three. People? People is one of the top five. Okay. Anybody have any other guess on this? What would you say?
I would say knowledge, but that's pretty
Knowledge. And if I asked you again? So, go ahead.
Is it network at all?
Networks?
Yeah, it's network to contact or distribute.
So distributors, by the way, is also in the top five. So there's one big one that's being missed. So I'm going to put these up here. Brand, intellectual property, customers, distributors, and human resources. Now, think about this. Those are the five intangibles that represent the majority of the value of a firm. By the way, sometimes somebody would answer that question as goodwill, and goodwill is just something that's lumped in here, and goodwill needs to be decomposed, and these are part of what's all, part of goodwill. And the five things are the major drivers of the intangibles which represent the majority of the value of the firm. Wow. Which of those are driven by marketing? Well, I put a red check mark by them. Brand. Here's the one that was missing is customers. So I heard lots of conversation about acquisition earlier today. I didn't hear anybody talking too much about retention. But part of where your value is, you got customers, you acquired them, and hopefully you retained them. And that's a real asset that you happen to have. Your relationship with distributors is really important. And I put a small check mark here because the reality is, come on, marketing doesn't have any control over IP. But what I would like to argue is that if you create great intellectual property and nobody knows about it, it's not worth anything. Further, if you create intellectual property that nobody cares about, it's not worth anything either. So marketing needs to be feeding into all the development team as to what it is that should be developed. So interesting, majority of the value of a firm is determined by intangibles, and the majority of the intangibles are driven by marketing. Now, how important these are differs dramatically by industry, and I could spend a lot of time sort of talking about each of those things. Okay. We could ask questions about all of these. I want to be a little bit conscious of time, so I'm going to just give you one more quiz. I'm going to ask you, which of these two firms is doing better? I've got firm A and firm B. And I'm going to point out to you what's similar about these firms and then what's different. Firm A generating $25 of profit for each of the last 5 years, same as firm B. They are doing it with the same level of contribution. That is, we have an 85% cost of goods sold or 15% contribution margin, and that's true for firm A and firm B. Aside from that, these firms are very, very different. So let's look at it. Firm A has been growing revenue by about, let's see, 450%. Firm B has been growing revenue by about 30%. Of course, firm A did it by growing revenue by 563% over this period, whereas firm B increased their marketing expenditures by about 35 to 40%. Marketing as a percent of sales has steadily grown for firm A. Marketing as a percent of sales has grown, but at a much lesser level by firm B. Here it's grown by 2.4 percentage points. Here it's grown by 0.4 percentage points. Return on sales has dropped by 80% for firm A. Return on sales has dropped by less than 25% for firm B. So which of these firms is doing better? B? Who said that? Why do you say that? Speaking to my mic.
They've spent less money on marketing, and yet they've hardly dropped in the ROS.
Yeah, so spending less money on marketing without the drop, as great a drop in return on sales. Okay? Any other answers? Yes, Daniel.
I think it depends on your perspective, but you could say A based on their growing revenue.
Growing revenue.
So they may have a better market value.
Absolutely. I mean, there'd be a bunch of underlying numbers you'd need to know. But
I will tell you, by the way, I put this up. So in the last 5 months, I've been in 5 continents. When I was in China, I put this chart up, and the majority of the Chinese voted for firm A because they said growth is where it's at. Who cares about profit? And we'll figure out a way to get there later. So if what you care about is growth, that's really important. So in the interest of time, show of hands, how many of you think firm A is doing better than firm B? How many of you think firm B? Okay, and there's a few of you that aren't thinking because I didn't see everybody's hand up. The majority of you say firm B, and most sensible people would look at this and say, wait, my return on sales here is 1.5% versus 0.6%, 2.5 times as great for firm B. Or put differently, I'm getting $25 versus $25. I'm doing it with $226 versus $563. I take the difference between the two and I put it into some CD or some alternative investment which generates more. There were about 65% of you that voted for firm B. The others voted for firm A or abstained. I will tell you, by the way, I put the hardest group I ever had to present to is I gave a presentation to 100 CFOs. That's a little bit intimidating for me. And I asked them which of these two, and 99 voted for firm B, and 1 person voted for firm A. I sort of felt good that I got that person to vote for firm A, and I turned to them and I said, so why'd you vote for firm A? And he said to me, I voted for firm A because it's so obvious if it's firm B. I figured it had to be a trick. I'm going to take this same data in those same 2 firms, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to just drill down 1 level. And the 1 level is, okay, now what we see is a growth in the number of new customers, growth in total customers. Sales per customer for firm A average about $250 per customer, whereas sales per customer firm B is $342. Total number of customers now for firm A is 3 times that, more than 3 times that of firm A, or firm B. It costs $75 to acquire a customer versus it costs $93 to acquire a customer. 20% of the customers churn every year. That is, you lose 20% of the customers every year. Firm B, you churn 46% of the customers every year. Everybody clear how to read the data? Okay. Another show of hands. Same data. It doesn't change what we saw here. But now we know a little bit more. How many of you think firm A is doing better? How many of you think firm B is doing better? Well, there's 2 hands that voted for firm B now. So what's interesting is, if you look at just the traditional financial data, it tells you one story. If you drill down and look at some of the customer-specific data, it really tells you a totally different story. And we need to make sure we're getting the right metrics in front of the right people so that they can understand it. I'm going to tell you, by the way, it's not even close. And again, I'm going to go through this very, very quickly. We could think about what's the value of a customer. And the answer to that question is the value of a customer is a function of how much does it cost to acquire them? How much is it that they end up buying? At what margin? How much does it cost me to retain that customer? What's the retention rate? And then how much influence do they have on others? And there's only one other thing that's missing, which is a strange one. What's the cost of capital? Because I pay now for customers that might have some value out in the future. During the LV presentation, we heard some reference to the lifetime value of a customer. And what it is we could do is say, so what's a customer worth to us? One of those assets that you didn't mention when I said intangible assets. That is, we acquire customers, they buy from us today. What's the probability they're going to buy from us next year? What kind of margins am I going to make from that? How much do I have to spend to try and retain them? What's the probability that they're going to buy from me in the years going forward? There's a calculation that one could do. I'm going to just race you through this very quickly. These slides are going to be available to you online. We're going to make sure, Vicky's going to make sure that you have access to all of these. Actually, firm A, we lose 20% of the customers every year. Average life of a customer is? Daniel.
Sorry, I missed the question.
Okay, so did you just fly over today? Is that did you what? Average life of a customer, given we lose 20% of them a year. 5 years, thank you. Did that without moving your lips, but 5 years. 5 years. So I make from them $37.50 per year. I do that for 5 years. I put that in current dollars. I make $123. Firm B, the retention rate for them was 54%. The average life is just a little over 2 years. I get $51.30 for them per year. Current dollars, that's 97. So I make a little bit more here, and if I would multiply that by the 3 times the number of customers, Firm A is doing exceedingly better than Firm B. They've built up this asset called customers, and it's an annuity stream going forward. And CMOs are very, very interested in that and very interested in trying to be able to illustrate that and demonstrate that. I could do the same thing by looking at the value of a brand. There's a British company called Interbrand that posts this in Business Week every year, showing values of brands. We spend on marketing. It has an impact on the particular values of brands. Really, really interesting story. I could spend the rest of the day talking about all of this. I won't. But unless you really want, no, I won't. But it's very, very interesting to be able to look at creating a brand value and part of what it is that we're doing. So I don't want to be just transaction looking. I want to be looking at what am I doing to create customers? What am I doing to create brands? How am I spending to try and affect that? And so what I've tried to do is take this and say, let's ratchet it up to the CMO level, think about what it is that they're really concerned with, and think about what are some of those metrics that are going to help communicate that. So in conclusion, from the CMO's perspective, it's all a battle for budget. It's all a battle for budget. So follow the money, and that's what it is that they're concerned about. But it's not just money now. I mean, it's my budget now, but I want to follow what that overall value is that's contributing to a firm. There's a myriad of different metrics that are out there, and they're being bombarded by them all the time. They have tremendous pressure, and this goes back to the IBM study, tremendous pressure to relate their spending to financial results. And therefore, it's incumbent on us to try and do some of that. The majority of the firm value is driven by intangibles, and the majority of intangibles are driven by marketing. And that's about as quickly as I could go through this and try and get through it as best that I can. We are going to be giving you a copy of one of my books on this topic later today. And do we have any time for questions? Yes. He goes, yes. So I'll take 1 or 2 questions now, and then anyone afterwards be glad to take those questions. Yes. Daniel.
One of the charts you showed a second ago showed some big companies and the value of their brand. Was that a direct calculation of the customer value, or did it have other factors that you can...
So this is not at all a calculation of customers. Now actually take a look at this one. Coca-Cola. Take away the plant, take away the equipment, take away the bottlers, take away everything else, take away the inventory. The value of the Coca-Cola brand, $70 billion. By the way, how many brands does Coca-Cola have? Guess.
30.
No guess?
20.
20, okay. They have over 300 brands. The value of one of their brands, of course, the mothership, $70 billion. They have a brand of water that is billions of dollars to sell. They have the leading brand of coffee in Japan, named after their home state, Georgia. You know, they have Sprite, they have Fanta. One of them, $70 billion. That is not customer, that's the value of the brand name itself. And when you're selling sugar and water, your brand better be very important. Let me tell you about one of them, you know, in particular. And by the way, the market cap of Coca-Cola is about 135 billion. So their brand value is more than 50% of the value of the firm. I'll tell you about 2 others up here. IBM. By the way, we tend to think that B2B, brands are important to B2C, but not important to B2B businesses. IBM, B2B or B2C? It's B2B. They're primarily, you know, IBM Global Services. I don't know anybody who's called up IBM and say, hey, I'm having trouble with my computer here at home. Could you come on over and help me? That doesn't happen. IBM sold off their ThinkPad division. They sold it to Lenovo. for $1.75 billion. At this event that I was at on Friday was the head of Lenovo and the head of Lenovo Advertising. They sold off 1.75 billion, and actually what they did is, what did Lenovo buy when they bought the ThinkPad division? They bought the brand, because they were already manufacturing the ThinkPad. They had the plant, they had the inventory, they were buying brand. And actually they...
IBM was losing $1 billion a year in that business.
Yeah, IBM was excited to be selling this thing off, and you're going to buy it? Whoa. You know, and it turns out they rented the IBM name and bought the ThinkPad name. And Lenovo just became the #2 brand in the world. I see Rick standing up, so I won't tell you the third story that's with this, but I got many more when it comes. So thank you very much. My pleasure being here.